Hi, I'm Tracy Morris. I'm coming to you today from my studio in McLean, Virginia. Architects, builders, and homeowners alike all ask the same question. How do I pick the right white? What is the right white for my space? White paint can be super confusing as a result of there being so many options. I'm going to help you figure out exactly how to pick the right white. I know it is super confusing. These days, everybody talks about colors in tonal whites and clean whites and warm whites. Let me help you understand that a little bit better. So warm whites, all that means is that you have a little bit of red in the base. That red can come out in versions of beige, and it can come out in pink. With regard to cold whites, that has a little bit more blue or gray in the base. I'm going to first start with ceilings. A beautiful white allows so much light to enter the room and make your entire room glow. But what white do I use? That's the question I hear all the time. Under 30 feet, I select decorator's white because it has a little bit more warmth to pull the ceiling down. If you have a really high ceiling, that particular color, I suggest atrium white. It has a bit of pink in it that's going to give an extra glow and an extra warmth in order to pull down your ceiling so it doesn't feel so high. Other whites with regard to trim. In order to create that truly custom look, try adding a little bit of tone to your white for your trim. That color, I would suggest, is Dove White or OC17. It has a lot of beige in the back tone, which allows you to get a beautiful custom finish that really looks white but doesn't feel builder grade. When you are working on your walls, if you are trying to show off amazing pieces on your walls, it really is best to paint your trim and your walls all the same color. Your space feels enormous and your artwork and your beautiful furnishings stand out. The color I suggest would be Ballet White or OC9. On your doors and your crown and your base, use a semi-gloss paint in order to allow those textures to come out. On your walls, use a surface that is scrubbable or wipeable, like a mat or any of the amazing Benjamin Moore products that allow you to scrub your walls. And you'll create the perfect space.
Hello, I'm Helene Oberman, Managing Director of Interior Design Magazine, and I'd like to welcome you to Product Live. This is our series that delves into the products and trends, grabbing the industry, and in real time, looking at the minds behind the design. For more than 50 years, Emser Tile has been a leading resource for the world's finest natural stone and tile. With their dynamic selection of products for both interiors and out, residential and commercial, this LA-based company can meet the specification needs of just about any designer's project. And through their unparalleled service, along with a production network that offers the latest in global trends, innovation, and technology, Emser Tile continues to embrace their commitment to their clients and to the responsibility to protect both the planet and its precious resources. With me today to provide insight into the brand and those trends shaping their product portfolio is Mara Villanueva Harris, Vice President of Marketing for Emser Tile. Emser Tile is like a sort of like a hidden resource in the industry, but you've actually been around for more than 50 years. Can you actually tell us a little bit more about the company and why now seems like really the best time to be making more of a statement or a splash out there in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. You have it right. Over 50 years. The company was started in 1968 by 5 brothers. And a lot of people don't know this. That's where the name Emser came from. It is the first initial of each of the 5 brothers. 4 of them are still involved in the business, as well as children and other family members. So it truly is a family-owned business. However, it's a very large company. And I think for a long time, they did sort of operate under the radar, best kept secret kind of thing. And we're just, frankly, we're too big to really be under the radar. We have almost 80 branches across the United States. And we also, of course, sell through retailers and to builders and contractors. So we're in every category that you could imagine: stone, tile, slate, quartz material, indoor, outdoor. You mentioned floor, wall, decorative. So we really do have everything that you could imagine. And then our branches also serve as locations where contractors and installers can get setting materials, can get tools. So it's kind of a one-stop shop. They can pick up the tile and everything they need.
So Mark, actually, can you tell us a little bit about your own background? Because I think it's really a benefit to your role at Emser Tile.
Yeah, I actually started life as an interior designer, and I worked for about 4 years in both contract and residential designs. And so it's been a great way for me to really understand, how do we reach folks? How do we, get our benefits across, or the features across, but respect their time and what they do, and really help make the designer successful. That's part of what we help them create great spaces. So it's fun to be a part of that.
With the Emser Tile hat on, though, how, from a business perspective, is the company really coping with the labor shortage that seems to be affecting all aspects of the industry?
So we're looking at how can we help from a product perspective. We have some 18 by 18 products that are ideal for a backsplash. They're scored to look like 4 9 by 9 tiles, so you get maybe a more decorative look, but it's very fast to install, and the grouting is simple. You grout with a different grout through those grout lines. Those would be things like Nostalgia and Cortijo, or some beautiful looks. But we also have 18-inch groutless Mosaic products. We have Bizu and Link and Feature, which are 18 inches high, which is perfect backsplash height. They don't require grout. They're natural stone, and they're stunning, but they're much faster to install because they're mounted on mesh, 18 inches high. You just line them up, no grout. So those help. And then another thing, we've already seen an interest in those large format tiles, 24 by 47, 39 by 39, the bigger tiles. It gives a nice seamless look, fewer grout joints. It might take 2 people to set that tile, but if you think of the amount of square footage they cover with one tile, it's less grout, so that speeds up installation. And then we're also actually, interestingly, seeing, we have our signature series, the metal profiles that most of the time you see for transition between a hardwood, I'm looking down because I have it, a hardwood and a tile. But we're starting to see them used to finish off showers or shower niches. We'll see people cut a standard tile to make a base and then just finish it with the profile, as opposed to having to set bullnose tiles and grout them. So that's another way that is maybe a time saver. And we're also seeing them used decoratively. So that's another interesting twist. But really, how can we find easier to install? And our, like I said, our branches have setting materials. So what are those setting materials that are faster, maybe pre-mixed, just anything to speed up the installation so they can get in and get out faster to the next job?
Well, it's amazing that you guys really put a lot of thought into it, and that you have those products that really can suit the needs for both, the labor aspect of installation, and obviously still have that sort of look and feel. I mean, it is true, large tile or large format tiles are very much popular right now. So it's sort of convenient that that goes hand in hand. But of course, I know you touched on it earlier, but obviously a major issue that is stemming from the pandemic is just beyond the labor shortage, is the supply chain issues. And, how can a company like Emser really tackle that?
Yes, well, we're fortunate. We have an amazing logistics organization. And because, like I said, we've been around 50 years, really is an expertise. We are a very major player in terms of transportation and logistics, and the amount of product we move around the world, frankly. And so that's one way. They've just been good from everything, from just issues that happen in different countries, whether it's tariffs or import challenges or manufacturing issues. We're vastly diversified, and the team has done a great job of anticipating and ordering and just keeping material in. So we're in pretty good shape.
We sort of were easing into my next question because, of course, Emser is able to put a designer's mind at ease because you do have a breadth of products that are in stock, or speaking about the accessibility of some products, being produced through digital printing.
Yes, we have thousands of SKUs in stock, and pretty much any array from entry price point, every kind of aesthetic you could want, multiple materials. I mentioned natural stone, ceramic, porcelain, decorative mosaics. We do make the large format porcelain slabs, which are also becoming more popular. And I mentioned material availability. I probably am going to have a mix of hardwood and tile. Hardwood's a challenge. I mean, the same thing in the downturn, mills closed. And so you don't just open up a mill. I mean, they went out of business. You've got to harvest the wood, treat it, dry it, etc. And because of digital printing, we can replicate any material. A wood look is possible. You have the benefit of the look of other materials with the ease of care and maintenance that you have with tiles. So it's kind of a double advantage.
Well, I want to kind of dive into some of the fun part for our audience, which is really like the trends. At Emser Tile, what do you see as gaining traction now that your annual catalog is out?
Well, it's interesting. There are the trends that kind of came with the pandemic. We all know about this sort of nesting. We're all in our home living differently than we ever did. And the office world is changing. So all these places that went to open office are now considering how do we sort of keep people isolated or keep the air moving or, give people the chance to interact, but without being too close. So it's really turning into a whole different look at office space. And then on the residential side, there is that nesting, there is that biophilia and wellness. I've got windows everywhere, and everybody wants to sort of bring the outdoors in. And we're also seeing an extension of indoor to outdoor. How can I maybe make that feel like a contiguous or continuous space? We're seeing greens and blues and those natural colors, a return to warm colors. East gray is still there, and I know it's been said a million times, but we are seeing the warm metals, the warm tones ease back in. This desire for authentic materials. We have products, like I said, wood looks, Hollywood, bonsai, that are a wood look, pitted concrete, stone. So a stone look, but maybe in a porcelain or ceramic, even fabric or warm textures that are presented in a different way. So those are popular in terms of trends. In terms of products, subway tile just seems to be here to stay. But what's interesting is we're seeing an interest in it's evolving, right? We're seeing more undulating surface, maybe more artisan, handcrafted. We have Passion, a collection that has a wide variation of colors. So rather than a solid color with a gloss, maybe there are 6, 8, variations of that tone. It comes across as very handmade and artisan. We have a series called Hbcus, which is a very matte, warm colors, almost an slight undulating surface. So again, feels natural, authentic, handmade, and soft, but still in that rectangular shape. We have Express, for example, which is a subway and still a gloss, but it has patterning to it that you can do in a very regular way, or the designer can get very creative and make patterns. So we're still seeing subway tile, but variations on it.
I know you kind of spoke to it, and I think it's so really of the moment, but because obviously we're living in a time where the health and well-being of people is more important than ever. So how does biophilia, which you did speak about, which we all know provides this emotional and physical comfort and connects people to their need to nature, really play a role in some of these upcoming introductions that you have?
Yes, biophilia and wellness combined are really a trend. I mean, certainly health and wellness with the pandemic. With biophilia, we're seeing, we've introduced more greens because that's really been popular. And I think I mentioned some warm colors, authentic materials. We have a lot of great products that really fit that feel of coming from nature. And while the material is natural, like I said, tile comes from the clay and stone comes from the ground, but we're able to offer, tile is heated at such a high temperature. It gets rid of VOCs, it's impervious to water, it's antibacterial, antimicrobial, resists mold and moisture. So it's a great health story, along with indoor air quality because it's easy to clean, but it also has an authentic material feel. Stone has been around for centuries, tile has been around for hundreds of years, and it'll last that long. So I think that's another reason that those materials are popular. And our launches try to bring in not just the colors, but the textures, the shapes we mentioned. We are seeing porcelains that look like stacked stone or look like marble being very popular. Wood looks very popular. We have Yakido, which is a Shishugibon burnwood look, which you might not normally see on a floor, but you're able to do that with tile, and it's easy to maintain, doesn't scratch, etc. So that biophilia, I want nature, but I still want to have easy to maintain materials. Tile's sort of that perfect blend. And I want to feel good about the health of my family or the health of the workplace. And tile is just ideal for so many commercial installation projects.
No, I have to say the last year and a half, I've never spoken more about hygiene and cleanliness and health and well-being. And I know that tile really speaks to the advantages of how designers can incorporate that into their projects. One other trend, though, that I do want to speak about that you have touched on throughout the conversation is the fact that there's one of Mother Nature's own creations that still continues to be popular, and that is marble or products that look like marble. And why do you really see an uptick in popularity during this time period?
We really do. And we have some really amazing, bold marbles. We have a product called Parkview that's deep, deep, dark colors, very dramatic veining. And that's kind of the eye candy. But at the end of the day, the classic look of a lighter, whiter marble with veining in either gold or silver or browns tends to be the most popular. And we're still seeing, we have a winter frost collection, which is natural marble with lots and lots of ways that it's cut into mosaics, decorative mosaics. And that collection is still going strong. We have products like Contessa and Swiss, Sterlina, Vara. I mean, just the number that we have tells you how popular this look is. I think it is just that it's a classic, that it can be contemporary or very traditional. It sort of runs the gamut. It's familiar, it's comfortable, but it can also be sleek and modern. It's a sophisticated material.
Definitely. Well, I've heard a lot about sort of also, like, I still feel like there's that need for a little bit of luxury now that we've been spending a lot of time at home, and marble can really, and marble-like products can really play into that. But Mara, just to sort of summarize, like, for all those really designers watching, what does really set Emser apart from some of those other manufacturers out there?
Well, I think it's frankly the great intro that you gave is it really is a family-owned business and has always had a culture that there can always be a win-win, that we can do what's right for our customer, and we will. We don't want to say no. We want to make anything's possible, even if it's something we have to create in partnership with the designer. So I think it's that attitude of support and partnership that we have. We were a founding partner with Material Bank. So we started at the beginning, our samples are available. And if not, we have, like I said, almost 80 branches across the US. So we're able, and we ship samples every day. We can drop off samples, boards, full-size pieces, whatever tools designers need for their clients and their projects. We're in the process of a new website, so exciting new things with a special commercial section to the website coming. Want to make you successful and help designers create amazing spaces, and we love being a part of that.
Well, it sounds like when there's a will, there's an Emser way. And with that, Mara, I just want to say thank you so much for all of your time and to your insight into the brand and just some of those trends that are really shaping your new product introductions. And of course, to our lovely audience out there, please make sure to check out the Emser Tile website to learn more about these products and of course, their extensive network. Thank you all.
It's a pleasure to be here with you all, and I appreciate being invited to offer these brief remarks to start off this incredibly important conversation. I appreciate kind of the framing around harnessing community for climate justice, and I would say harnessing or really uplifting community leadership to center community voices, community vision in terms of defining and advancing climate justice. So I appreciate that. I also appreciate recognizing that this whole notion of design and it needs to be at the center of how we think about redesigning our societies, our systems, and our built environment in a way that resonates with what being in harmony with the earth systems and in order to achieve sustainability. So I very much appreciate this recognition that all of these matters are inextricably interconnected. So as we think about kind of engaging all stakeholders in this conversation around built environment, it's important to recognize where some of the communities that need to be on the front lines are coming from in terms of experience, analysis, and how do we make sure that we're not framing this as kind of bringing people into something, but recognizing that we need to go and get behind frontline communities. So when we think about climate justice, we situate climate justice within a complex set of intersectional, individual, familial, community, and societal factors and systems that look at social, economic, and political constructs and see the interplay there. In our nation, that means that who you are, and then intersects directly with the quality of where you live, work, play, and pray. And it all matters to one's relationship with each of those factors, the social, economic, political, and other constructs. And so for African Americans, as an example that I know best, being African American and working with these constituencies through the NAACP and through the Chisholm Legacy Project, we know that historic social, political, and economic disenfranchisement has been detrimental to the generational resilience, but also it's been fortifying of resilience, because for us, like so many other communities, Indigenous communities and other BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, resilience has become a way of life because it's had to be because of the various shocks and challenges that we face in our communities. But at the same time, for all of these BIPOC communities and culture, all communities and so forth, culture, brilliance, and sheer kind of survivalist grit, and the fact that resilience is in our DNA have been protective factors in a way that allow us to survive minimally, which is what so many folks are facing, but thriving optimally if we move our society to where it needs to be. So we know that we've got a bit of an uphill battle, but we also have a lot of assets to grow on. We know that looking at the United States alone, contrary to the romanticized narratives of how this country began with this notion of kind of people seeking freedom and so forth. But it really started on principles of extraction, exploitation, and domination that still are prevalent today and rooted in this notion of white supremacy. So we know that when at the very beginnings of this nation now called the United States, but that is really stolen land that was founded on the theft, the displacement, and the murder of the original inhabitants of this land. This is the beginning, this is the roots. And then the same folks went over in ships and then went to sub-Saharan Africa and stole people away from their lands and from what would have been their inherited wealth and their families and their social connections, put them in the holds in the bottom of ships as cargo to then become the enslaved labor that built so much of the infrastructure for this nation. And so that's important to kind of keep in mind when we think about really the beginnings of this nation, and of kind of the extractive economy that still prevails today. So when we think about the impacts of that in terms of where people are living, how people are living, then we know that this overall economic insecurity that has resulted in extreme income and wealth differentials for BIPOC communities has played a role, but also in addition, the political disenfranchisement has resulted in extreme disparities in home ownership, redlining practices that impact everything from whether we own homes, where we own homes, and the quality of the homes and other resources to which we have access. We know that African Americans, for example, are 40% more likely to be homeless. African American families are 50% more likely to be homeless than white American families. And we also know that the siting of our homes is more often in floodplains, more often in urban heat islands, more often next to toxic facilities, and more often subject to crumbling infrastructure. An African American family making $50,000 a year is more likely to live next to a toxic facility than a white American family making $15,000 a year. When we were first, after Hurricane Isaac in 2012, we saw that Plaquemines Parish, which is largely home to a lot of oystermen and other fisher folks and so forth, and we saw it was inundated 7 years after all the levee fortification that had happened after Hurricane Katrina. And then I was watching CNN after I'd been out in the field all day and saw that they asked Senator Mary Landrieu why it was that Plaquemines Parish's levee hadn't been reinforced like other levees. And she said she asked the Army Corps of Engineers the same question, and they said they use a formula to decide which levees would be prioritized for reinforcement. And that formula applied points to each levee based on what the economic impact would be if the levee was overtaken. So that means that literally it was institutionalized, that the people who could afford, who have the housing stock that's most vulnerable, the people who could afford least to be able to bounce back after being inundated, the people who are most vulnerable to loss of life were literally by formula the least likely to be protected. As Dr. Robert Bullard said, wrong complexion for protection. And as it was, I don't know if folks know the book, Weapons of Math Destruction, MATH, that really talks about how formulas are at the root of institutionalized inequities in this country. And so when we look at all of these, and then on top of it all, with going back to the economic challenges, the financial insecurity means that with less likely to be homeowners, but then even when we are homeowners, less likely to maintain homeowners insurance, much less have a flood insurance clause. So these are all the kind of challenges that we have. And we also know that in the context of when we think about buildings, that our buildings are more likely to have indoor air pollution, more likely to be less likely to be energy efficient. So therefore, as BIPOC communities, we're more likely to have a higher proportion of our income go towards energy bills. We're extremely much more represented in LIHEAP roles, the low income heating and energy assistance program, but yet so many of us are left out of those opportunities as well. We put out a report as the NAACP a few years ago called Lights Out in the Cold, Reforming Utility Shutoff Policies as if Human Rights Matter, because we saw too many times where people had lost their lives because of having their heat cut off for non-payment or their electricity shut off for non-payment. So we have people who were lighting their homes with candles, which we know is one of the #1 causes of home fires, or people were heating their homes with what do you call it? The home heaters, I'm talking about those stationary, those portable heaters, space heaters, and losing their lives as a result. There was a family of 5 where a father, after the electricity was turned off for non-payment in Michigan, he went and got a generator, but because he was in a less than an area where he was concerned about crime, he brought the generator inside for safekeeping, not knowing that it would be a death sentence for him and his 5 children because through carbon monoxide poisoning. There was a woman, literally the summer after we put out this report, where in the dead of a heat wave, which we know are in the increase now, she had her electricity turned off for non-payment, but her son found out that she was having a hard time paying. So he went in and he paid directly to the company and brought her bill to be 0, totally current, but the system didn't catch up in time. So 2 days later, after he had paid, they shut off her electricity in the dead of a heat wave, and she was depending on a respirator to breathe. So she literally paid the price of poverty with her life. While these utility companies on average have CEOs that are making $9.8 million a year in compensation, someone who is unable to pay a couple of $60 bills has to die as a result of having their electricity turned off. So these are the various challenges that we're seeing in homes, and challenges that we see in the lives of people where this intersection of race, poverty, the political system that kind of manages to maintain a strong kind of orientation towards utility companies and fossil fuel companies because of the unholy marriage of money and politics. When we talk about schools, even in the same communities that are having challenges around homes, we know that the schools that are surrounded by pollution, there's an image that I often show when I'm doing presentations of the Cesar Chavez High School, and it has an oil refinery behind it with this black plumes belching from the smokestacks there. And that oil refinery is one of 5 oil refineries within a 10-mile radius of the school. And that is, again, because local government has kind of a no holds barred lack of regulations around where these things can be built, because they want the tax revenue, but who is paying the price is those communities on the front lines. Schools with lead pipes, and there's schools from Newark to Jackson, Mississippi, where kids can't even drink from the water fountains because of the lead in the water. Schools with poor circulation as the heat increases, and a lot of these schools are in urban heat islands or even in rural areas, and so they're not really fit for kids to be able to be safe, and not to mention be able to concentrate and learn. These schools are not built for fluctuations in temperature, especially the extremes ones that we're seeing. And so we also know that schools are financed through property values for the most part. And as I said before about the wealth and race differentials in property values, and in living next to toxic facilities, your property values are more likely to be lower. So you have schools that are facing underinvestment, kids who are having a hard time paying attention in school because of the lead that comes out of their water fountains or out of the smokestacks or in the paints in their walls, even though the lead abatement efforts have been significant. Or we have a hard time, or we have kids who aren't even going to school because African-American children, for example, are 3 to 5 times more likely to enter a hospital from an asthma attack, and 2 to 3 times more likely to die of an asthma attack. So we have kids who are out of school, lost days of school, according to the American Lung Association, are significant in these communities. And so when you're not in school, or you're having a hard time paying attention in school, or your school is being underinvested in, then the chances of you being able to be on grade level by the 3rd grade is compromised. And if you're not on grade level by the 3rd grade, you're more likely to enter into the school to prison pipeline. And now we get to the over incarceration of our communities in prison, and prison as an environment for too many of our communities. So when we think about where we live, work, play and pray, for too many of our communities that's in prison, we need to be thinking about the quality of our prisons as well, until we can abolish some of those situations. So we know that Black folks are incarcerated at 5 times the rate as white people. Black men comprise 34% of the prison population, while only 13% of the population in general. And Black women are twice as likely to be incarcerated than white women. We also know that there is a prison industrial complex. And so while people are actually, there's forces that are trying to get as many people incarcerated as possible, because it is a business for people who run the prison industry, not only just in terms of the amount of money that the people who own these private prisons reap, but also because the people who are in prison are often engaged around labor. And so we have places where counties actually list prisoners as assets with monetary values next to their names. And so I realize I'm only a minute from my 15 minutes, and I've kind of gone through all the negatives. But so in the remaining minutes, I will just say that we appreciate your focus around as designers, as product people who are manufacturing products, as people who are building our various structures, your attention to these issues. So as we think about the type of changes that we need, it really is what I know that ILFI is on, and they'll be talking about their just tools. We're really talking about needing to move from this extractive economy and from this notion of pollution and so forth to a regenerative economy. And that includes regenerative design of our buildings and of our built environment. And so really appreciating your recognition of that need to advance regenerative design, and also in both our kind of the building materials, the buildings themselves, how the building's energy is utilized. And then also recognizing that we need to center equity in our built environment as well, both in terms of who is building, who are the vendors, making sure that we need to have equity in the architecture field, in the interior design field. We know that only less than 3% of certified architects in sustainable design are Black women, for example. So we need to really work on how we ensure that we have representation, so that there are people who really understand what I've just said, because this is their lived experience. And that as we engage and live in designing our communities, designing our buildings and so forth, the people on the front lines are critical at the center of those conversations. So definitely wanted to kind of ground us in what it looks like to advance, to what it looks like in terms of where we are now and where we need to go in terms of a community-informed, community-driven definition of climate justice, which centers, again, the built environment as a critical element on the path to climate justice. So ending with the notion that one of the, as I talked about in the beginning, that there's this false sense of scarcity that drives people to oppress, to exploit, to dominate, to extract, when really there is abundance. The biomimicry being at the center recognizes that, you don't have ant colonies that hoard crumbs. We have people who, that we don't have the ways that are different, whether it's animals or other parts of our ecosystem, that they're all operating on cooperation, all for one and one for all. And these kind of, that if we really follow biomimicry and sustainability of planet and people, then we can't go wrong. So thank you all for really centering these notions in the conversations that you'll be having going forward. And the Chisholm Legacy Project is here to help. One of the things we'll be doing is training people on this based on the initiative we started the NAACP called Centering Equity in the Sustainable Building Sector Initiative, that trains people on how we do this intersection between climate justice and the built environment and the building sector. So super excited to be on the front lines with you all in advancing these principles and practices and policies. So thank you, and I will pass it back.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. I really appreciate it. And thank you for, I think it was really important for you to take us through each of those different scenarios, because everything that you touched on was also grounded in a building type. And I know you did that by design, And so it's really important. I think there's a role for all of us to play. I love that last idea, though, that you brought up. If none of us took more than we needed and gave back as much as we could, that is the way to equity and justice. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. I really appreciate it. And I hope everyone listening will find ways to engage with the Chisholm Legacy Project and with the NAACP's initiative around climate justice in the built environment. I urge you to go to their websites and see how you can be engaged with their efforts as well. Jacqueline, thank you so much. So appreciate this. I'd love to bring our panelists for today's discussion on. I think Jacqueline has laid out as good an introduction to the topic as anybody could hope for. There's a deep intersection between the climate movement, the healthy buildings movement, the sustainable buildings movement, and equity and social justice. And the one thing I would like to say is, we often think about justice in the use of buildings. So of course we are concerned with the fact that schools where Black children study, or homes where formerly unhoused folks live, are not built to a lower quality and therefore do not affect them during use. But I would also urge us to think about justice and social impacts throughout the life of buildings, not just in their use, but also in their construction and at the end of their first or useful lives. And so, there's a long chain of sort of impacts for us to consider through this process. To help us talk about that, we have three panelists here. Corey Martin is the principal at Hacker Architects, Eric Corey Freed, who's the director of sustainability at Canon Design, and Roxanne Spears, who's the vice president of sustainability in North America at Target. Hearing Jacqueline as well, I think, especially in a really public way in the public realm in America since the murder of George Floyd, we've really seen this broad conversation about equity and justice. And that has also been, I think, brought to the forefront in our own industry, in the built environment, in a more forceful way in the past couple of years. How have you been thinking about the connections between that and the legacy of our work in our industry on green building?
First of all, it's an honor to be speaking on the same stage as, I don't know if this is a stage, but to be on the same stage as Jackie Patterson. So that was great. And I was taking notes as she was talking. I don't know if you all were doing the same thing. But I want to push back on your question a bit. I think that the conversation has been happening in communities for decades. It just didn't appear on our nightly news, maybe. But I've been working with communities on their sustainability plans, their equity plans, their climate action plans. And they've been having these conversations for years. And the murder of George Floyd, over an agonizing 9 minutes, by the way, maybe that was a spark that lit a tinderbox that had been building for the last century, really. But not to dwell on that too much. But climate justice is woven to green building and sustainability, or whatever number you want to call it, because the effects of climate change are inequitable, and they're being felt inequitably throughout the world, just as the effects of COVID have been felt inequitably across the world, just as we've seen with Hurricane Sandy in New York, Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and then all the other hurricanes that I don't even remember the names of now because they're so damn frequent. And driving all this has been decades of bad decisions and bad actors, redlining cities and segregating them in really evil ways. By the way, there's a great book, if we're adding books to the list here, The Color of Law by Rothstein is a great book that covers the redlining thing if you want to read about how evil Robert Moses was in New York. But the way I think about it is like this. The more diverse an ecosystem, the stronger it is. Diversity is our pathway to strength. And so if we build the greenest building in the world, but it is inequitable to its community and to those around it, is it still a green building? Right? It's like building a LEED certified slaughterhouse or something. It's like you're kind of missing the point here. And so to me, climate justice, equity, diversity, inclusion is implied in sustainability. And I think over the last 5-10 years, if anything, we've gotten better at speaking that language, really. Jackie spoke of abundance in her talk, and that's really my take on sustainability, right? One of the strategies we use is we sit down with clients and we say, what do you have an abundance of? We do this thing called asset mapping, where we kind of look at the community around the project and try to make connections to it. We look at the resources that are being provided from the sun and turn that into energy, right? It's this abundance mindset, and I loved hearing her talk about that, because I think that ties into sustainability perfectly well. We have to get out of this mindset of scarcity, and we can't afford to build green buildings because they're too good, or something like that. Craziness that we've been doing for the last 30 years needs to stop, and we really need to focus on abundance. And so with every project that we're doing now, we're asking the client, how is this building going to improve the community around it? And unless they have an answer, we can't really move forward. And so if we're designing a hospital, we're asking those questions. If we're designing an elementary school, we're asking those questions. And if we're designing, I don't know, even an office building, we're asking those questions. And I tell them, you might not like the answers that we come up with, but we're going to have the conversation. I don't know if any of you saw, but Greta Thunberg, who I'm in awe of, gave a speech yesterday that everybody's calling her blah, blah, blah speech. Did you all see that? If not, I'm sure you'll see it on Twitter instantly. But, it's amazing how at her young age, she's able to put into words things that have been boiling inside of me and all my sustainability colleagues for years, which is stop friggin' talking about it. Just start, just go do it. When I was at Eco Districts working with communities all over the country, Rob Bennett, who's a lovely man, came up to me and he said, I have some advice for you. He said, when you're going into communities to talk about equity, especially as a privileged white man, you have to bring a level of humility to this work. And I'm not normally known for humility, as Avi will attest, right? So, but he was absolutely right. There is a level of humility here that I really enjoy getting into, and I facilitated hundreds of these conversations now, and each time I'm getting a little better at it, and I'm hopefully someday I'll be good at it. But there's a humility that I think we all need to bring to these conversations, because it has been boiling for decades, and certainly worthy of taking the time to have the discussion. So with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks so much, Eric. I think, by the way, I am going to drop the link to the blah, blah, blah speech, because of course, everybody should watch it, but I will ask you not to watch it now. Can you wait till we finish today's session before you click to it? The link is there, so copy it out for yourself, okay? Thanks so much, Eric, for that. As you said, it is a misnomer to call a building sustainable if it doesn't address the impacts it has on people. And very often I think I almost wish that when we're choosing products, putting together materials, seeing construction go up, look at a building, we see not just the people who walk in and out of the building or the people who live around it, but also all the people that are represented in the materiality of the building itself, because there's a long chain of hands and people that touch a building long before it goes up. So I think it's so lovely to hear you talk about having those sessions and having those conversations. I think those are difficult conversations to have, but so important. Thanks so much for that, Eric, and we'll dive into that a little bit more as we continue the discussion. Corey, Hacker has an amazing portfolio of community-centered projects. You've done schools and libraries and cultural venues and housing. And of course, every time you're pushing the kind of boundaries on the limits on sort of how regenerative and how sort of positively impactful each project can be. Can you dive a little bit into Hacker's approach to what we just heard Eric talk about in terms of how you engage community as part of that process of green building?
Yes, thanks, Avi. It's really interesting to hear everyone's take on this, and Eric, really inspiring and humbling. Just the way that you bring your passion to the work that you do, and the way that you think about expressing how the work you do matters. And I think, I've been lucky enough to see you speak a few times, and this is no different. So thank you. And thanks also to Jackie, because I think this whole thing is a team effort. And, I'm just here to share a little bit about how our organization thinks about things and how we're changing a little bit. And, I benefit from all the inspiration and the effort and the work of a few key kind of specific individuals at our office. You know who you are. And then also just a number of our younger staff. And you are the ones who are pushing hard against the way things have been done to ensure that, there's a real authentic awareness of the issues of our time, and that those issues permeate the culture of our office and the way that we think about doing things. And it's this incremental work that's been going on for years behind the scenes in our office, in other offices, and in industry, and in communities, and in government especially. And you know who you are. And that work is what's brought us all to this, I think, significant crossroads. So please don't give up. But yeah, to answer your question more directly, I think for our office, and we want this thinking to become commonplace, is that the sustainability and the climate justice, and then the types of work that we pursue, they don't just coincide, they're one and the same. They're the same thing, because the type of work that we try and do is very intentional. And so we do community forward projects because we want to design buildings that help to regenerate our communities. And so we also have, kind of adjacent to that and interconnected with it, a really super specific mission to find ways that we can inspire people to have more meaningful connections with nature. And so that's another thing it's one and the same to us. And so that said, so even within the range of the projects that we consider, we're really selective about the projects that we end up actually pursuing. And so it's hard to do, but we only work, if we can, with clients that we feel will collaborate with us, really, to find ways that we can make buildings that are more harmonious, so with their larger community, and that we make sure that each project has an opportunity for us to define a really specific innovation or innovations that help us move toward a more equitable and regenerative world in the long term. And so that said, we don't ask that every project does everything. We know that each building or space that we design is just a step in the process. And so it can do a few things very well, just in an effort to see it as a part of an overall body of work that's always trying to move forward. So, and just, I think it's important for all of us as designers, just to realize that the majority of people on the planet aren't thinking about what they can do to help regenerate the earth when they wake up in the morning, to kind of quote Paul Hawken, just because they can't think about anything else other than what they're going to do to survive that day. And so we know we need to make the world more equitable, and we need to help people to live in a way where they can care about the climate crisis. So all the things that Jackie was talking about, the people that she was talking about, the situations that occurred, they weren't thinking about the climate crisis. They were thinking about that day. And so we know that the solutions are going to require everyone to participate in however they can. So we need to help people be able to even try to participate or think about it for 5 minutes. So, and I think part of that for us, and this is just, there's so many things that we're trying to do and everyone is trying to do, but we think that, we as designers need to work to engage our communities earlier. So not on a specific project necessarily, to do things that help people think about how their environment and how the spaces around them impact their lives, and then how those spaces can impact other people's lives. And so that we can learn together, how we can approach the issues of our time before any project starts. So these are the people that will determine, how far we can push ourselves to leap forward, and we need to understand their point of view to be more effective at helping them make the change that needs to happen. It's going to work better if we're truly all working together. And so there are programs and things that we've been involved with, like Your Street, Your Voice, which is just incredible. That's just a really grassroots way of getting, kids to think about things that they normally wouldn't think about because they can't. So thinking about how their environment can contribute to their experience in life and bigger issues as well. So that's kind of how we see it. And thanks for having us here today.
Thank you so much, Corey. I think implicit in what you said is, I think, a really beautiful idea about, what our role is as professionals. And I think it builds really beautifully on what Eric was talking about too. Because very often, sometimes, the excuse for doing things as they have always been done is because, that's how other people want it, right? But I think while we continue to educate those people on why we need to do things differently, we also have a sort of professional obligation. And I think that's why, having some pathways set by our professional associations, or, having sort of industry initiatives, having these conversations is really important, because, it is just that, how do we strike the balance between we're going to do the right thing nonetheless on behalf of the people who don't have the wherewithal or the space, the resources, or the time to be engaged with these issues themselves, while at the same time empowering them to do so more and more, to engage with what directly affects their lives. So it's I think one of the deeper sort of questions at the heart of socially engaged work, which I think all architecture and interior design should be. I'd like to bring Roxanne in here. Roxanne, Target, has chosen one of the most comprehensive frameworks for sustainability. There is the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a kind of North Star for the work that you're doing. And you broadly describe it as doing good. And I actually love that, because it allows us to sort of define various goals as interconnected, as we've been talking about. So you don't think about social impact and equity and material innovation, or technological sort of breakthroughs, and then climate action or decarbonization as separate things from each other. Can you talk a little bit about how that has informed your work at Target?
Yes, thank you for having me. TARCAT was introduced to the 17 UN Sustainability Development Goals when they were first introduced. And the goals are really meant to be a call to action for all countries and corporations to really create a global partnership for change. And that change was supposed to be to create strategies that improved health and education, economic growth, as well as addressing climate health. So for Target, when we looked at this as a flooring manufacturer and thought about, how can we really impact some of these goals? So that meant looking at how we conduct business, how we make products, and then how we interact with the communities that we have facilities in. So the one part of it that led us to really look at how we make our products. And if we're going to have sustainability attributes in our products, then we decided it had to be across the board for all price points. Why would we only make sustainability products that were at the high end of our cost point and not available to everyone? So in doing that, we really decided, families and users, designers shouldn't have to make a decision based on price and based on what they could afford to really have a healthy space. So we're flooring manufacturers for both residential and commercial. And this influences what we do both in the residential side and the commercial side. Everybody should have the right to healthy material that has a sustainability attribute to it. It can't be just because you can afford it. So as developers are looking at doing, say, for instance, a multifamily project, they really need to be able to address all the interior spaces, all the spaces as equal to any other development they would do, whether it's an underserved community or a high-end project. Everybody has that right. And so that was really a big driver for us on continuing to develop products that had sustainability attributes through everything we do. We've also seen that, healthy products don't have to cost more. If you're looking at how you manufacture and you're good at what, creating, say, a luxury vinyl tile, There's really no difference in making it so that it's healthy materials and making it bad materials. You're looking at your raw materials, you look at the recycled content, and you want to make sure that what that product is creating for emissions is the same at all price points. So for us, that was one of the important things that we really learned from the UN sustainability goals. And the other is, as a manufacturer, you really have to make a commitment to a circular economy business model. And that process is about, designing out waste and pollution and designing for longer use. So if a developer in an underserved community is looking to do, say, a multifamily, you're looking at a product that's going to last longer, it's worth the investment then. And so we're hoping that they can see the value in creating projects that have good materials in, that are going to have long lasting value for the community, and show that that does pay off for their investment in the long term. And I think keeping products in use longer is also one of our sustainability areas that we want to work with and continue to work with. I think the 17 Sustainability Development Goals are geared for countries and corporations. But if you haven't gone on the United Nations website and looked at what those goals are, they're actually also linked to what you can personally do for each goal, showing that each of us can make a contribution to these goals and make a change for our communities. Every little bit for any of the particular goals. One is eliminating poverty. There's a list of what each of us individually can do to help impact that goal. And I think if we look at some of that and take some personal actions besides just as a corporation, we're going to move farther along for a more equitable future as well. And then as we think about the future, one of the things Target is really focused on is what programs can we support that are educating kids. Children are going to be the next generation making these decisions, and they need to learn now. What does that mean? We work with the Global Wellness Institute, and they do a program where it's educating children about what is wellness. If they learn through school what wellness is, they're going to demand it later on. And we work with a design museum who has a program called We Design. And it's taking an exhibit around to underprivileged communities to show them what design is. And design for We Design is graphic design, it's buildings, but showing kids who may not be exposed to these different occupations, what is an engineer? What is an architect? Showing them that these could be professions that they go into where they can make a difference for their community and all communities. So for me, I think it's really tied to many different angles of it. But you, as a manufacturer, have to start with the basics of making sure you're providing healthy materials for everyone, but also then educating that next generation who's going to be so much more engrossed and involved in making these decisions, and make it a passion for them as well, so that as they continue into the workplace, we see an even bigger change than we're making right now.
Thanks so much, Roxanne. That it's incredible that having adopted that framework has really resulted in such a multidimensional approach. I want to just emphasize again the earlier conversation, the first part of your remarks around cost and providing equal opportunity, sort of equalizing the market when it comes to certain basic attributes, safety and health, and of course climate responsibility, ecosystem health. I think and that's just so important, even so that as you're doing this work, and as others are doing this work, Eric just pointed in the comments. Eric, I'm going to get you to talk a little bit about that in a minute, about Canon Design's engagement with historically Black colleges and universities. Your own work with the Design Museum, Roxanne. As we are starting to kind of educate or advocate within communities for people to recognize the power of design and what design can do for them, that then the solutions are accessible to them as well. So we can't do one or the other. You have to kind of, you can't tell people they need to demand good design and then not have anything that is, accessible to them. That is just, that would be a huge failure on our part as a profession as well. So I love that you sort of looked at that entire pipeline in your response. We're going to keep going here. Reminder to everyone, get your questions and comments in. We already have a couple in, but go ahead and put those in Q&A. We'll start to dig into that in just a minute. A quick thank you to our panelists today, Eric, Corey, and Roxanne, for already an amazing discussion so far. And of course to Jackie Patterson for her remarks that really laid the foundation for today's discussion. But thanks also to Armstrong Ceiling and Wall Solutions, Carnegie for Micah, Herman Miller, and Target for making these discussions possible. The Perspective Sustainability Series continues tomorrow with the announcement of our first ever Planet Positive Awards. I was especially gratified to see projects that applied provide metrics on the diversity of their project teams, including their design and build teams. And it was incredible for me to see that acknowledgement of community impact, not just in terms of the users of the project, but also in terms of the people who brought the project together. So some amazing work that we're going to be recognizing tomorrow. I hope you will join us for that. So more details on that in chat, so you can take a look at that link. Okay, let's dive in a little bit deeper. We have a question here from Miguel Quinones that I'd like to bring up because I think it speaks to sort of what seems to be a sort of baseline understanding of the green building movement regarding and acknowledging what you said, Eric, earlier. But he asked, how can we move from generic green buildings, most LEED, WELL, and LBC certified buildings, to buildings that honor the places where they're built and grow the potential of the living systems they touch? One could argue that some of these systems some of these certification systems do attempt to do just that. But I'd like to hear your reaction to this kind of popular, let's say, disconnect that still persists between, community-centric perspectives and planet-centric perspectives, as though those can be prized apart. Any reactions to this comment? I know, Eric, you were going to comment on that, but maybe you want to get us started, and then Corey and Roxanne can jump in as well.
Well, first of all, I love that for Miguel, LEED and Living Building Challenge are now just baseline generic. Like, he's so in his mind, he like, that's not enough, and I agree with you. But that's wonderful. But a reminder that Living Building Challenge does include an equity pedal, which is 4 of its 20 imperatives are focused on equity, and I would argue that they're all kind of indirectly focused on equity. So if you're not familiar with Living Building Challenge, it's certainly worth a look, and I know we're going to look at just after this. But how do you do it? You have to raise the questions, just like we have to do with everything else, right? Clients don't come in asking for, give me a high performance building. Like, it doesn't, that's not, they want a building that works for their needs and is affordable and can be built on time and on budget. And I think it's our ethical and moral responsibility to push them in this direction. And it won't be easy, and it won't be neat, and you'll run the risk of, I guess, alienating certain clients. And that's kind of the way it works. But just start having the conversation. For us, it really begins with, before we're even hired, it begins in the proposal, right? We're bringing up these things, we're talking about these things in the proposal, in the interview, and also in the makeup of the team who we're putting together and who we're bringing on board. There's a wealth and abundance of great talent out there that you could pull in and partner with on your projects, and they'll help you kind of navigate and be your Sherpa through these conversations if you've never had them before too. So you don't have to kind of take it all on your own. You can you can partner with great people wherever your project is. What we found is I think I mentioned that we do this process called asset mapping, and we'll go into a community and we'll have everybody with markers and Post-its and write down all the different assets. And sometimes assets are physical assets like parks and rivers. Sometimes assets are sociological assets like organizations that serve the community. Sometimes they're institutional assets like museums. But if you start to ask people about their community and have them mapping out their community, it's kind of amazing, because eventually what happens is you get this kind of surge of just stuff, and we'll get a map that's just covered with notes and post-its and markers and stuff. And then what I do is I have everybody step back for a minute just to appreciate the just sheer scale of all the assets. And really, it's really an exercise in abundance and getting them to say, we're not coming from this place of scarcity, we're not coming from behind, but if you look around your community, there's plenty to work with here, and maybe all it really takes is just starting those conversations. So for Miguel's question, I think that's one of the ways it starts, but it won't be easy. Oh, and he's an ILFI ambassador, so he already knows all full well about it. Okay.
Corey, do you have any reactions to that? How do you start that conversation within your projects?
Well, I think for us, we're just naturally curious about the places that we work and that we want to know the true story. And for us, it's about really knowing what's actually happening in the places that we work, not just in the immediate time span, but in the long range time span, even in the geologic time span. We love getting into that. And if we could, I think we would stay there for longer than we can on every project. But it does relate to what Eric's talking about, right? Is that it's about really understanding what the assets are on that site. And telling the story is the other kind of really important part that I think we need to do a better job of as a profession, is that, yeah, you can collect all of this stuff, but what do you do with it? You've got to figure out a way to tell the story that's really compelling, right? Like, I know that for me personally, when a story is told well, I remember it and I care about it, and then I share it with people. So that's the next step, I think, is really being able to tell the story well. And that's something that we're really passionate about and we need to get better at too.
Roxanne, how is Target thinking? I mean, I'm sure, just as buildings are, you're inundated in sort of eco labels and certifications and things like that. And I know, it's good to have benchmarks and goals. It puts us all on a level playing field, and it's important to move the conversation forward. So by no means am I disparaging certifications or frameworks. I would never. But the question is, I know that you've been making an effort to think beyond that a little bit as well in your own way of assessing your products. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Sure. For Target, for product certifications in particular, there's so many out there and they cover so many wide ranges, but we've really tried to look at it very holistically. And we do a lot with the circular economy, but we also do a lot with the cradle to cradle certification. And part of that is because through the cradle to cradle certification, it doesn't just hold us accountable, it holds our suppliers accountable as well. So we feel like not only are we demanding change from our suppliers, but the certification demands the change as well. And it's kind of like pulling along another business with us to look at things differently. And for us, cradle to cradle, we love the fact that social fairness is part of the certification, water stewardship, soil stewardship, renewable energy, climate change, and then material utilization as well as material health. And when you look at all of that as a manufacturer, of course, we're not impacting the way a building is truly built, but what we are hoping that we're impacting what's used in that space. And if people start looking at actual product certifications more and say, yes, I want a product that looks at social fairness and is judged by a certification for social fairness, because we don't want to work with a supplier who has child labor, is not offering fair monetary value to someone, or is creating material for us in a facility that's polluting the area around there, so that a community now has contaminated soil that's going to have to be cleaned up. So I think if we look at certifications are kind of a demand by the marketplace, a demand by our customers to have something. I think if you look for certifications that are much more holistic and take into account a bigger picture, it forces businesses to change their outlook, and you're not just going for the cheapest ingredient or the fastest material you can get. You have to look at who is supplying that material to us and what are they doing behind the scenes. And that's really what we're trying to do is be accountable for our actions, I guess. And I think that is what all of us are trying to do in whatever space that we can, is take accountability for what we're doing and making the positive impact we can. And so for us, this has been a bit of a driver for us. We've been doing for almost 15 years now, and trying to look at, even as a product, how can you look at it that is more equitable in as many ways as we can?
There's definitely an onus for us. I think we have some questions in here that require that, ask about understanding our own positionality. And I think that is also important. Eric, you spoke about, having those conversations as a white person and humility. And that's part of the equation is, understanding the limits of, or the ways that maybe we might be encroaching on other people's opportunity and abilities, but also the power that we have, right? What can we do? And I think whether it's at a product scale or a building scale, that's really important as well. I think the trio of responses here, I think, are really amazing, is, to look at the sort of the deeper story, as Corey, you told us, also to help people recognize what is around them and to kind of shift their mind about what resources are available in any exercise, Eric, as you've been doing with some of those asset mapping exercises you've talked about. And then also understanding that we have choices, we have agency in our choices that we make in the components we put in buildings as well. And that those, to varying degrees, might represent fairness or unfairness or equity or inequity. And so, there's really, as we've been saying, conversations about equity to be had almost in every stage of the design process. And that's really important. Calvin Bronner asks, well, actually, we just got in a question about certifications. I'm going to bring that up first, and then we'll look at the others. Dave Breinart says, question regarding social justice certifications. Isn't the certification process itself potentially putting some at a disadvantage? Smaller disadvantaged makers may not have the resources to get certifications. How do we get the information without making the certification process complex? And this speaks to, and I will say, you can put smaller firms or architects in place of makers and come up with a similar kind of question about building certifications as well, even though Dave's question is about product certification. Can we talk about that a little bit? How do we, there is a cost sometimes to, third-party verification, to, assessment, to really looking at impacts. Is it really possible for smaller practices and smaller manufacturers to also start on this journey? Eric and Corey, you represent firms of different sizes, so that might be something to play on as well. Can we talk a little bit about that? How does everybody get in on this journey? How does everybody get started?
I can, from a product side, it is harder for small manufacturers to do as many certifications, but if you look at our supply chain, they're already certified. They're showing that they're certified. So a smaller manufacturer can look for those companies that already have that certification. So at least they have the basis behind it, and they can then work with suppliers. They don't have to actually go through that whole certification process, but at least search out suppliers who maybe they themselves have gone through that process, so that you're a small manufacturer at least looking for someone who can provide you a better certification just in using their raw materials. I would say one where the other is there's a lot of universities that offer research, students looking to do research and work with smaller firms to really develop new products to develop new processes that's at no cost or very low cost. And I think that's a good resource for small companies who are really trying to be entrepreneurial. And in doing so, you're getting a great cross-section of students, a great background of knowledge that you would never be able to employ for a small company. And it's giving them the experience to try something new, and then giving you the experience of being able to develop something different that you wouldn't be able to do as a small company would.
You know, I work with a lot of startups, you know, clean energy, clean tech, whatever startups. They're doing wild, cool things. And it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, they're already doing a lot of things that are shown in a social justice certification, whether it's B Corp or Just or any of the like, in terms of gender diversity, pay equity, engagement, responsible sourcing. And, you know, from those founders, I usually hear things like, well, this isn't fair. We can't afford this yet. You know, we're bootstrapping this. It's a priority of, do we go get a certification and spend money and time on that? Or do we go get something like a flame spread test, which we'd need to sell more product? You know, it's usually like one or the other type of choice that they need to make. But there's more of an inherent sustainability to what they're doing anyway. That's a generalization, but still. But that being said, some of these are really light lists. If you look at the list of companies that have gotten the Just label, surprisingly, they're not large organizations. Most of them are 50 and under type employees, in part because Just is easy to understand. I think at the heart of all of these certifications, no matter what you're certifying, whether you're certifying a building through LEED, the wellness of a building through WELL, or the social equity of an organization through Just, at the heart of all of this is this basic principle: if it gets measured, it gets managed. And having previously worked at Living Future Institute, I can tell you that just having them go through the process of raising the questions is already an advancement on what they were doing before. Whether they get the certification or not, it's great that they're just using this framework to have these internal discussions. So if you're a company and you're feeling overwhelmed by the process or the cost or any of that stuff, just start playing around with the certification just to have those conversations. And then you could set yourself up for success that maybe, you know, a few years from now, you can go after it. And when you feel that you're more ready for it.
I think the only thing I had to add is the experiences that I've observed around this are that when a small company has the certification, they can use it to point to and to guide them in decision making when there are a lot of people asking about which way to go. And when you're not certified, it's different, right? Because you're not actually, you know, beholden to uphold the kind of terms of that certification. And I don't think it's just in architecture firms and design firms. And, you know, I've seen it also in small manufacturers who care about everything they're doing, and they have a diverse staff, and the staff are wondering about why the firm is doing certain things that are more expensive, right? Maybe because they're trying to, for instance, meet the requirements and their commitments to their B Corp certification, right? And so they can point to that and say, well, everybody, this is why we're doing it. And so it helps everybody get around the mission.
So I have a question here that's, I think I'm going to call it the standard perspective sustainability question, because it's a question that we've answered multiple times over the last 4 years. But it comes up over and over, and I think it comes up in different shapes and forms, and it's worthwhile for us to take some time to respond to. Calvin Browner again asks, so often clients prioritize the fiscal cost related to our projects, but what are some strategies for discussing and eliciting commitment to social and environmental costs from clients? I wonder, what if there were Superfund sites for places that have experienced extensive cultural and ethnic destruction? Yeah, that is a great idea. But you know, this question of cost, and Roxanne, you spoke about this in your opening remarks a little bit. there's a perception or not, reality or not, there's a cost to doing the right thing. It might be, there are different ways that we can look at cost and benefit. I know there's different models to address this. So I'd love to hear from you how you think about this, this cost of commitment to social or environmental goals from clients, and how you have that conversation with clients.
We are working with clients. Some of them are public sector clients that come to us with a mission and a goal already around social justice, right? And so we've worked with them to help research it and make it part of the project. And it's interesting that some of our experience also has been that even despite that, they've had a hard time realizing their own goals. And so I think what we all need is we need to be able to start these conversations earlier with our clients and with our existing clients, not just future clients. It's not just about marketing. It's about going back, I think, to people that we've worked with before and starting the conversation before any project starts, right? So that in a way that conversation is mutual and the passion is shared. And so when we start whatever project together, or maybe we design a project, maybe to Calvin's question, together with those clients, we can look for one of those metaphorical super fun sites or something as a goal project to pursue together. That's kind of how I see it. I think we got to work together earlier.
Anybody who's been working in sustainability for any period of time knows that you're constantly throwing this cost thing all the time. And every sustainability person I know has a set of tools in their toolbox of how to confront this. Because if your client is typically a facility manager, their job is to build the building on the budget that they've been provided in the schedule they've been given, right? All of their KPIs are pointing them to make the building as cheap as possible. If your client is a developer, it's even worse, right? So the focus isn't cost, the focus is upfront cost. And so one of the little tricks is to turn the focus away from assuming cost means final cost of project, but the upfront cost, and make informed decisions. So we move them to what we call a lifecycle costing analysis model. And at Canon Design, I call it LCCA plus, because not only if we're evaluating systems or materials or whatever we're evaluating, not only do we look at the upfront cost, the operational cost, the maintenance cost, the repair cost, the replacement cost, but we're also including non-financial considerations. So this would be, does it have some societal benefit? Does it have some benefit to the students or the patients or the staff or whoever is in this building? Things that don't have a direct linear financial one-to-one ROI payback, but we know has value. So for example, if I can prove to you that this living wall improves student test scores, does that outcome have value to you? If I can show you that by avoiding cancer-causing chemicals in the building, that we can trigger certain positive immune responses in patients, does that have a value to you? So we don't just fall for this game anymore. I mean, we did, but we don't fall for this game anymore of assuming cost means the only cost and upfront cost is the only cost, and we're just trying to get a building as cheap as possible. Instead, we're giving the clients enough information so they can make an informed decision over the life cycle of their use of the building that involves not just financial, but all these other things. We as designers, we've all seen this time and time again, right? Where you show a client a certain countertop and they just fall in love with it and they don't care what it costs. They just have to have it, right? And I've seen the power of that time and time again. So I think what it really means is that we in the sustainability business need to make them fall in love with our ideas. And the way that we're doing that at Canon Design is we're targeting what I call an outcomes-based approach to sustainability. I'm not selling them on a green roof. I'm selling them on all the benefits that a green roof provides, which includes thermal mass, stormwater management, installation, biophilic design, area of respite, right? All those things are a benefit. All of those things have a value. And so very early in the process, we show them these outcomes. We design towards those outcomes. We put a value to those outcomes. And then when we're getting into upfront cost, we then remind them, remember that was something that you wanted to design towards, remember that was something that you wanted. And it changes the game up quite a bit, because I'm sick and tired of arguing over, well, this floor is going to cost $10,000 more. Yeah, but it's going to last twice as long, right? I was sick of having that conversation. So now we just do this LCCA plus thing so the owner can make an informed decision, and it's really changed the game. So to Calvin's question, that's a great one. And if you're starting to talk about commitments to social and environmental costs, well, now we're getting into, well, this company is a B Corp, or this company is a just label corp. And that's also important to the people that use and occupy this building. Corey mentioned stories. I think architects at our best, we're great storytellers. And so how many times have we been in a place and, hey, see these beams in the ceiling? Well, those used to be the old train track down the road before they demolished it. Like that, all those stories have, immense power to change people's perception and change people's minds. So I'm all for leaning into that and designing towards the outcome rather than just bottom line upfront cost.
Yeah, and if the story can be inclusive of a much larger concern than it has been in the past, it will be even more compelling.
Yes, and by the way, it'll go viral. People will talk about it well beyond.
Yeah.
And nobody ever talks about, oh, you see that countertop? It was the cheapest one we could find. Like nobody ever tells that story because it's a crappy story. But if you say, see this countertop, it was made by indigenous people in Bakersfield or whatever, and whatever the story is, that story has power, and then it also then is self-replicating. It's an upward spiral and starts to get people to want to support more of those types of efforts.
One of the comments that came up during yesterday's discussion was to stop considering the bounds of our projects as the property lines, because the property lines are notional boundaries. And I think what you're both saying kind of connects to that, right? Like we're not really looking, yes, we're looking at ROI within the property, as you're saying, the green wall and the green roof and the benefits there, but then there's all these intangible, sort of benefits that reach out from this project into the larger world, into the surrounding community, or even the larger world, right? We were having a discussion at Metropolis a little earlier about, we're talking about climate and carbon footprint so much, and how is that an equity conversation? And one of the things we were saying is that, climate change is sort of the only way to address global inequity through a single building project is by looking at the carbon footprint of that project. And so there's this way that we can think about the social and environmental costs in a limited way, but we can think about the social and environmental benefits in this really sort of broad and big way, and that might have resonance with some people too. So definitely taking on board a lot of things that you've said about, and I think both of you in Eric and Corey are talking about reframing narratives, and I think that's really important, and then forming that basis with your LCCA plus method, Eric, which sounds amazing. A couple of quick questions here. Kelsey has a question about your process. Hi, Kelsey. Kelsey is at SQ2 Ripple and has been doing amazing work around embodied carbon. Eric, how do you quantify these elements of life cycle costing, case-specific analysis or rule of thumb, and how do you budget for it in your project time and fee?
Great question. So it's been a rocky road, because the first LCCA stuff that we got was, from a mechanical engineer, and it was, no offense, pretty dry, very numbers heavy. It was an ugly Excel spreadsheet, and the client would squint at it and nod their head, and it wouldn't change their decision making. And that's what kind of clued me into the fact that we needed to be better at it. So our first round of it was just taking the raw, boring data out of Excel and making it more actionable. And sometimes that's, a number that says, okay, this system will pay for itself in 32 months. Just doing an intellectual filter over it. But then as we got into it more and more, we realized, well, there are these other benefits that are going unmentioned. So let's say we're considering a chilled beam system. Yeah, it costs a little more upfront, but it has acoustical benefit, it has infection control benefit, it has comfort benefit for the occupants. Like those things should be mentioned too, How do we talk about that? So then we just kept kind of evolving it. And so now it's basically a slide, and it's like pays for itself in 32 months, has these other benefits. They have little icons next to them. It's pretty slick. And we can whip it up pretty quickly, but we do that kind of back end. And we try to do it as accurately as possible. One of the other things that we've been doing is we've been building out dashboards using Power BI or Tableau in the back end to take this data, and that way we can show our assumptions. And if the client disagrees with our assumptions, we can just like move the little slider to, okay, then what is it? What is a fair number for, cost of money, or maintenance cost or whatever, and we just slide it, and in real time it'll generate. And so this data-driven analysis is becoming more and more of a thing. And eventually I think this will be a tool that we'll have packaged up that we could share with the world. But right now it's pretty rough. but it's working.
These are technical questions, and I just want to ask us all how this question and how Eric's answer impacts awareness about climate justice and justice in general in relation to climate.
Fair point. Yeah, I could nerd out all day long.
On that point, next question, Elizabeth Kakara says, have you considered the role unions can play in building equitably? We also have to talk about fair labor in this conversation, where workers are paid middle-class wages with benefits. The trades, how do we engage? How are the trades our partners in this journey towards climate justice?
Who wants to go?
Oh yeah, I have a great anecdote, but we're coming at it from a very backwards way of doing it. So, I think Elizabeth's question is implying that, oh, we're an architect, we're designing a building, and then we're pushing the contractor to do it. We're going through this right now. We've developed a sustainability action plan for the Cortex Innovation District in St. Louis. One of the things that we built out of that sustainable action plan was tenant improvement guidelines. I mean, pretty boring stuff, right? But in the tenant improvement guidelines, woven throughout it is equity. So there is a requirement around their use of XBE firms, which is minority, women, business, veterans, disabled, so forth, right? So there's a mandatory requirement that you have to use a certain percentage to do your tenant build out within the Cortex Innovation District, and we're rolling this out. And these guidelines become a very powerful tool. In one sense, they're a way to attract talent, to come and make Cortex their home. And in the other sense, it sets the expectation very early on that if you want to be part of this community, you have to be part of this community. It's a little tougher with architects because we normally don't boss around contractors in terms of their subs and who they pick. But it is something we can totally work with the client to set that expectation early on of, what are the XBE requirements, and ideally how can you use it, again, not as a checkbox that you just have to go through, but rather as an opportunity to really infuse more of this enthusiasm and experience into the project.
If we want to pile onto that, which is really great, I think the spec thing is a really good place for it. But we get pressure all the time from our developer projects to not use union labor because it costs more. And the way that I think of it, I think we need to think of it more, is that we need to again to really truly partner with our developer clients to understand their point of view, right? And if we're not doing that, and we don't really come to the table as a true team member, we're not going to understand why they're asking that question. And we don't work with developers, with most developers. We work with a very select few who are trying to do good in the world through the work that they're doing. And so that's how we approach, the work in the world that's available. There's a huge sacrifice that we make because we're not doing 99% of the possible work out there. But we have, even with that select few that we really want to work with, who are aligned and resonate with the values that we have, we still have that conversation. And so it means that we have to have earlier conversations with them about what their overall goals are and how we're going to help them get there, and that we're truly team members. We're not just this hired firm that they're coming to to execute their vision. We're really their partner in this. So I think that's critical.
I saved these two big questions right at the end. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about them. Lance Collins asks, equity is the key principle that is needed to accelerate the change that will make measurable impacts on Black and Brown communities. In addition to using your power or equity to bring attention to this topic, I ask, what of your own or your organization's power are you willing to give up to balance the scales? So what space are you making? And I think all three of your organizations have ways that you're doing this. What space are you making for folks who, are what we call, MAPA, or come from disadvantaged or underprivileged, or are affected by inequities in society? I'd love to hear just what you're doing to create space for that.
A few things for Target is, as we partner with different organizations and going to collaborate, we want to make sure that those organizations has the same values as we do. One organization we collaborate with, Green and Healthy Homes, where they have been working with different hospitals to kind of assess kids that are high risk for asthma and allergies. And they find those kids miss a lot of school. The parents miss a lot of work because they're taking the children to the hospital, and it becomes a social and economic issue. When they go back to the homes these kids are living in, they find it's mold and mildew. The homes have not been maintained. They're usually multifamily. There's water coming through, there's rodents. And so partnering with an organization like that, where we can go in, we can remodel and set a new standard that affects the health of the people in the space. It affects their ability to maintain a good job, and it affects the child being able to have continuing education and not increasing his dislike of education because he's never there. He's always in the hospital for asthma or something. So I think all of us have that responsibility to look for, at least for a product manufacturer, is to look for who we can collaborate with to make a change, and then show that change can be made. And continuing to grow that type of background is, those are not new buildings, they're not new construction, and they haven't been maintained. So now where do we go with that? What is the solution? And sometimes there is no other solution than to partner with a manufacturer or other organizations to help make those changes and remodel where they're living so that they can have a healthy space. So to me, I see that as a value for a corporation, as well as who we're hiring and who we're partnering with. All of that is opening up to make sure that we're talking to the people who can give us the right information as a partner, but also bring in those new ideas. That diversity is what every organization needs, because if we're only looking at through one lens and we only know that one lens, we're not going to make any changes in how we do business or how we partner or how we make a product. So we need all of those voices to help us change as well.
As much as I appreciate Lance's question, I want to push back a little bit on it, because I don't know if power is something that you give up to create balance. I think maybe a better model that I would subscribe to is one of collective impact, where we get to use our position to help support others, right? So it's not a give or take, net zero sum game, but rather one of where we can benefit everybody. And so I think we're doing this on several fronts, but I'll mention three. The first one is out of our St. Louis office, we started this little pilot program that we called what do we call it? Canon Design Collective. And basically it was selecting a bunch of these XBE firms, mentoring them on what large institutional clients are looking for so they can better prepare. This included very tangible things like how to interview, how to assemble the proposal, how to put your fees together, to also much more abstract things. And it went over a period of weeks. We also then recruited talent from within the firm to meet with them and kind of work through topics. And then now we're partnering with them on projects. we're not giving up power per se. They're not giving up power. We're both benefiting from each other, and we're bringing more diversity and interesting capabilities into our proposals. So I don't think it's like a for you to succeed, I have to fail kind of mindset, but much more of let's hold on let's hold on to each other, and collectively our voices can be louder together. I think so I'm just pushing back on your wording, and I can't see you or hear you, so I don't want to nitpick on it too much, but it's pretty cool. The second one is we've been doing and I put this in the chat. We've been deliberately partnering with HBCUs. There are 11 or 12 HBCUs that have architecture programs, and so we've been working with them as a recruitment tool to just get their best and brightest and put it into the talent pool, into the firm, and it's been kind of awesome. And in areas where we have offices located near those HBCUs, we've been doing more with them, including speaking and mentoring and sitting on juries and all that fun stuff. And then the third thing we've been doing is we last year hired a DEI director, which we'd never had before. And part of the structure of that was that our CEO's own KPIs are tied to our DEI goals. So if our DEI goals fail, our CEO fails, essentially. So he sinks or swims with the success of that program. So he has a very vested interest in seeing it thrive. And it sounds like a little thing, but it is a huge thing in terms of governance and how we look at the firm and how we hold each other accountable. And those are just three kind of quick examples, but there's always more to be done. And I welcome all of your ideas on how to do that, because it is tough. And some of these things are so like embedded in our brain of how the models and paradigms are supposed to work that it's hard to see past them at times.
I think for us, it's right now we're in a kind of a tumultuous period of learning about our own internal implicit bias. We're a just certified firm. We've been tracking our diversity, and we're discussing heavily and learning through workshops, and we've done several over the years, and then literally right now we're in the middle of another kind of big one that's ongoing. It's with everyone in the firm. There's listening sessions for our BIPOC staff, which is super important, and the outcome, everyone's really excited about it, is unknown. But our just certification, is really there to kind of show that we're doing everything to create an environment that is on a physical and emotional sense there. But when you look at the actual numbers of people, we're still not diverse enough in leadership. And so here I am talking about that again, just as the shining example of that. And I think, the work that we're doing hopefully helps us find a really authentically meaningful way, because we're not interested in doing anything just to have a number or a better percentage. We want it to literally make the work better. And we know it will. So bringing diverse viewpoints to the design process is another way that we're thinking about it, is that we're probably at a point right now where we're at an inflection point where we've become so collaborative in our office that it's actually costing us. It's making it hard for us to move forward in some cases, but we want it so badly because we do want those voices at the table. We want everyone's voice to be heard. And so we're in the middle of figuring it out. We're a much smaller firm than Canon Design. I think Canon, you're like 1,200 people, you were saying. We're 60 people right now. So it's really exciting to hear about how a larger firm can make things happen, because they have so much more sway. And as far as giving up power, I kind of was wondering about that term too, but I think it's right. I think this is all about power. And I think at some point it does have to be given up. And I think another way that you can do that is through mentorship. And that's kind of what Eric's talking about, is that mentoring everyone to learn what they can to succeed. But even the definition of what success is probably needs to change, right? Because that definition is determined by the power structure that's in place. So those are the questions we're asking.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Corey. I think that's probably an honest estimation of where all of us are, whatever our race or background might be, in terms of, learning how to deal with inequities in our world. We have known for a long time that we live in an unfair system. We have known, for a long time that the way things are isn't right. And I think every generation goes through this learning process, comes up with its own answers, and figures it out. And then the next generation finds those answers imperfect and builds on them. And I think that's part of it. We're at our time now, and I'm going to leave a question on the cutting floor, so to speak, that I regret leaving there. So I'm going to read out the question in a minute, just so we all hear it. And it's something for us to think about. I think all three of your responses to the earlier questions are also in a way responses to this question. And so, I will bring it up. But before I do that, a quick interjection to say that another way of thinking about power is checks and balances. And I think, as someone who comes from thinking about, critical studies in the humanities, and then recently, I think, become more interested in democratic processes. This is something that we learned from how democracy works. Democracy is working towards fairness and equity. And the way it does that in a healthy system is through checks and balances. So, rather than thinking about taking power or giving power, which only perpetuates inequity, I would say a better way to think about do we have responsible checks and balances to the exercise of power? And I think that's a really important way of thinking about it. Before we close out, a quick thank you to our panelists today for this amazing, amazing discussion. Thank you so much for being so giving and honest and generous today, and in your willingness to engage with all the questions that have come up from our audience. I really appreciate it. Calvin Browner asks, and I think this is a great note to end our conversation on. He says, some of our panelists have shared the importance of youth and inclusive education. What is being done to acknowledge and interrupt the intrinsic connection between Western architecture and settled colonialism? And Jacqueline started us off on this by talking about the origins of building on this land that all four of us, I think, are on at this point. And especially disrupting the way design pedagogies prioritize white epistemologies and ontologies and erase Black and Indigenous communal and ecological knowledge. And I think, we think of communal and ecological knowledge as something that lies in the past, when it is knowledge that every community continues to generate today in their ways of surviving and being in the world. And so listening to people today is just as valid a way as looking at the deep histories that Corey spoke about, the histories that, Corey, you'd like to spend all your time looking at if you could. And so, I think that's really important. It's an important perspective. I think in this process of checks and balances is the act of listening, the act of acknowledging, the act of kind of, sharing power, sharing responsibility, creating opportunity, making space. All of these things are really important. Thank you all so much. And I truly appreciate all the work that you all do in the world. You are, working towards creating a better society for all of us, and we appreciate it. Thank you so much. A big thank you to our sponsors, Armstrong Seating Wall Solutions, Carnegie for MICA, Herman Miller and Target for supporting the Metropolis Perspective Sustainability Symposium.